I'm Sue O'Connell. Tonight on Greater Boston, after a flood of criticism poured in after her team's NCAA championship win, we're going to dig into what's really behind the negativity LSU star Angel Reese has been getting for her gestures on the court. Then, a microchip that lets you control technology with your mind. It may sound like the plot of a sci-fi movie, but major tech leaders are working to make it a reality. Should they? Trash talk isn't exactly new or an uncommon phenomenon in the world of competitive sports. You can catch it in just about every NBA, NHL, and NFL game on TV. So why is NCAA champion Angel Reese getting all sorts of backlash for it? Well, here are the moments in question from the championship game. Reese's Louisiana State University beat Iowa 102-85, broadcast on ESPN.
Angel Reese knows a ring is coming.
And for those who don't know, Reese's next gesture is the classic WWE star John Cena's famous "You Can't See Me" move, aimed at Iowa's star point guard Caitlin Clark, who's been doing it in other games throughout the tournament. But Clark's gestures have gotten a very different response than Reese's, which critics, talking heads, armchair analysts, they called her out after the game, saying she was classless, tasteless, pathetic, and an effing idiot. And First Lady Jill Biden even floated the idea of inviting both teams to the White House instead of to the customary winners-only visit. Her spokesperson eventually walked that back, though, after a wave of criticism, including from Angel Reese, who now says she has no plans to go.
When other people do it, y'all don't say nothing. So this was for the girls that look like me, that's going to speak up on what they believe in. It's unapologetically you. And that's what I did it for tonight. This was for the more than, it was bigger than me tonight. It was bigger than me.
I'm joined now by Dr. Tina Opie, a visiting scholar at Harvard Business School and an associate professor at Babson College, and Shira Springer, journalist and lecturer, MIT Sloan School of Management. Welcome to both of you. Dr. Opie, let's start with you. I got a lot to say about this. I know all of you do too. What's your reaction to all this? What was the difference between the two players? I'm trying to put my finger on what the difference might be.
Oh my goodness, what could it be? Let's just say I can relate to this because this behavior, whether it be that, whether it be expressing anger in the workplace, when people like me, Black women, do that, it has a very different response from people in the workplace or on the court or in society writ large. Oftentimes, let's just call it the white women. White women and Black women can express the same thing. And oh my goodness, people who I think weren't even necessarily commenting on sports before, clearly weren't even aware of the NCAA women's basketball game. They had to dip their toe in this. They had to say something. And they were clearly uninformed. And they were being racist and sexist. Let's just call it what it was.
Tina, I got to tell you, on my Facebook page, I just posted, what's the difference? And then after it was pointed out to some people, they were really twisting themselves in a knot, trying to say, well, one did it after the game, and you know, one did it after she won. And I was like, oh, that's just classless, that no one should be doing it. And I'm like, Larry Bird, people, Larry Bird drove me crazy. Shira, besides the obvious racism, the thing that drives me crazy about this additionally is that people only seem to care about women's sports when we're not acting in the way that the male athletes act. And to Tina's point, all sorts of college athletes get in all sorts of real legal trouble, and no one comments on it. And these two women have a competitive relationship, and suddenly we're talking about it. What's up with this?
Yeah, I mean, not only that, Sue, that they're talking about it. And if two male players had done this, if this had gone on between two male players, this would not be the topic of conversation days after it happened. So, and that I think is, you're really getting at part of the frustration with the conversation here, which is this was a record-setting tournament in terms of ratings and attendance. There were 9.9 million viewers for the women's final. I think it peaked at something like 12.6 million viewers. That's the stuff we should be talking about. That's the progress we should be talking about with women's sports. And instead, we're talking about women athletes behaving as all athletes do, right? Talking trash, getting in each other's faces. They are competitive, and they should be competitive, and they should be able to show it however they want. But somehow that always derails the conversation. Like you said, if they're not behaving the way we expect them to behave, or perhaps better said, how culture has traditionally expected them to change. But that culture and women's sports in general is changing, and our perceptions and expectations have to change along with it.
Tina, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, when you said how we expect them, what's so funny is when I played sports, and I didn't play basketball, but I did, this is how we behave. And I was talking to my co-author, actually, Dr. Beth Livingston, and what we were saying is the behavior, if you heard Caitlin Clark, she said, look, Angel is getting backlash that she shouldn't be getting. This flies directly in the entire stereotype about women that we're somehow catty. You've heard people say so many times, oh my gosh, women have to get over themselves. You know, men can fight it out on the basketball court and then go have a drink afterwards. Women can do the same thing, people. We have got to stop depicting women somehow as these emotionally stunted people who, if you bump into me on the court or if you get in my face, I take that. In the heat of the battle, we can go there just like anyone can. We are equipped to do that. Furthermore, can we just talk about the fact, how many times have you seen in a basketball game somebody, a man, let's just say a person with testicles and a penis, hold on to the hoop, swing, drag his testicles across somebody's forehead? We don't even talk about that.
Well, we are now.
Can we just talk about that? I'm sorry. Is that not humiliating and degrading? But people laugh at that. People don't say that that's classless. But meanwhile, somebody does the same hand gesture that has been done throughout weeks and years, and that's classless. And classless is a dog whistle. It's similar to the term thug and ghetto and everything else. It's like the N-word almost. I'm sorry, if you use the term, you need to check yourself.
I want to reference Caitlin Clark. We have her some sound here of her saying what you said, showing some sisterhood and some allegiance in this. Let's take a look.
I don't think Angel should be criticized at all. No matter which way it goes, she should never be criticized for what she did. I'm just one that competes, and she competed. So I think everybody knew there was going to be a little trash talk in the entire tournament. It's not just me and Angel. So, I don't think she should be criticized. Like I said, LSU deserves it. They played so well. And like I said, I'm a big fan of hers.
Shira, also to this point of how women are expected to behave, we do, I think all of us, build this idea that if women lead, if women were bosses, if women are the president, the world is going to be different. And someone said to me today, a woman said to me today, well, we have higher expectations for women when it comes to playing. And I expected, she never watched the game before and she only knows about this, but she expected women would behave differently on the court. Mm-hmm. What would you answer? What would you say to her?
I was going to say, it goes back to, again, we have expectations, and those expectations, as you were saying, your friend may not have watched or been much of a women's basketball fan before. Those expectations come from a place that doesn't match up with reality. And the reality is, we've been talking about, women are competitive. They trash talk. They behave this way. But I think what also has to be noted is that both Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese were the real mature ones in this situation. First, we saw here Caitlin Clark talking about, her respect for Angel. And there was also a moment where, as you mentioned earlier, Jill Biden invited both teams and Clark said, no. Only the champions go. The runners up don't go. And then let's go back to Angel Reese's comments where she was saying, this is, I'm going to be who I am. And I think that's really important too, that she in that moment didn't back down, that she stayed true to herself and to who she was and to the message she wanted to deliver and the model she wanted to be to other young women basketball players. I think that's really important. And nobody's talking enough about that because that's progress too. Because there was a period of time in women's sports where women felt they did have to fit a certain narrative, where they did have to cow to certain expectations. they did have to be in a certain box to be accepted. And I think it's great to see on both Caitlin and Angel's part, speaking their minds, saying what they believe, and being true to themselves.
Tina, help me out a little bit. If I'm a white person who reacted with my bias and internalized and maybe externalized racism and said something stupid when I saw that, and then it was pointed out to me that, Caitlin had done the same thing, what should I do? Should I apologize and accept my mistake, or should I try and dig in and explain why Larry Bird is better and it's got nothing to do with that?
Well, it's funny. I use the term dig in the book Shared Sisterhood that I wrote with Beth. You definitely should not get defensive. Own it up. Own it. Say that you're sorry. Think about it. Pause. I think in this, we all have Twitter fingers sometimes. We hit send way too quickly. Apologize, acknowledge the mistake, and then maybe take a step back and explore why you acted so quickly. We're all swimming in so many stereotypes. None of us are going to escape those stereotypes, but we have to learn how not to act on them. And I do want to comment on, I also want to, your question about the person who expected women to behave in a different way. That is a trap. To me, feminism, civil rights, I want those movements to free all of us to be able to act how we want to act. Those expectations can be a trap. They're a cage. So when you say that she expects women to act a particular way, and she's saying that we're all supposed to have white gloves on with dresses and have our hands and be prim and proper, absolutely not. That does not comport with how some of us want to live, and we should have the freedom to choose how we do so.
Hey, Shira, I want to throw a curveball at it before we wrap up. I've been saying for years that as soon as men could bet on women's sports easily, that women's sports would be elevated, and now here in Massachusetts, they can. Am I going to be right, or am I going to be wrong, or nothing's going to change?
I think you're going to be right. I think anything that brings awareness, exposure, and interest, and helps people or makes people, motivates people to follow the story of a particular team, of a particular player, of a particular sport, that's good. And betting certainly makes you want to follow the stories of different teams and players. So yeah, I think it will help raise awareness and exposure and interest, and hopefully we'll see that in higher ratings and more value placed on women athletes and women's sports.
Dr. Tina Opie, as we wrap, I know we're not talking about the game. We're talking about the sport, though. We're talking about women owning themselves and being who they are. At the end of the day, is this going to end up moving us forward?
I hope so. I hope that it has shown us that we can have disagreements, make mistakes, but together learn how to move beyond that and have honest and hopefully authentic conversations about it. Because we have to do that.
Okay, I'm doing this now because I have to end, okay? All right, you guys. Dr. Tina Opie, Shira Springer, thanks. I'll see you on the court, okay?
Thank you.
Next up, does the idea of a microchip in your brain sound exciting or horrifying or both? Well, either way, the technology might be a lot closer than you think thanks to some of the biggest names in tech. Synchron, backed by Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, is working on an implant that would help people with limited to no physical mobility operate technology, and that's currently in a clinical trial phase. And then there's Elon, his Neuralink, a company that's looking to start clinical trials on its chip, which they hope will be able to help people regain sight and muscle control they'd previously lost, though the FDA denied their application last year, citing serious safety concerns. So, how exactly would these devices work, and what are the risks? I'm joined now by Antonio Regalado, senior editor for the biomedicine at MIT Tech Review, and Nita Farahany, a Duke scholar who specializes in the ethical, legal, and social implications of emerging technology. She served in President Obama's Presidential Commission for the study of bioethical issues. She's also the author of The Battle for the Brain, The Battle for Your Brain, Defending the Right to Think Freely in the Age of Neurotechnology. Welcome to both of you. Antonio, this is one of those things I've been paying attention to. I have some people in my family who have had deep brain stimulation surgery. Pacemakers, I imagine, are part of that family as well. What is the current technology out there, and how is it being used?
Well, if we're talking about implanted technology, in your brain.
Yes.
That can include sort of different kinds of shunts if you have fluid on the brain. Right, deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's disease. It's kind of an electrode that goes into the brain and pulses electricity, and it's amazing the effect it has on people's symptoms. Parkinson's patients have tremors, and it'll just stop the tremors cold. And then there's devices for epilepsy. Same idea, shock the brain in a controlled way and control the epilepsy. The next step are these interfaces, implanted electrodes so that people control computers, like a computer mouse. And that's the amazing thing about brain-computer interfaces that already works. You can control a computer mouse with your thoughts.
So in my personal experience watching my loved ones go through this also with the transcranial magnetic therapy where they put magnetic pulses through your brain, it seems a little hit or miss to me in some ways where I hear from some people we're not really sure how the brain works, we don't know how this works, we know what the science does. Are we moving ahead on it with just kind of a best guess, and that's what the FDA is for to help us with, or is there some real solid evidentiary science to it?
Well, the amazing thing about these brain implants that are put on the motor cortex is that they really do work. It's a series of electrodes that are touching some neurons in your motor cortex, which conveniently is right here on the outside. And by reading those signals, the scientists can figure out what kind of motions you're imagining. So imagine you're moving your arm like this. They can detect those signals and then they can reproduce them in a robotic arm or on a computer screen with a mouse. And so that's the technology. It's really very repeatable. The big question is the implant itself, right? It's this piece of metal, even if it's very fine pieces of metal that have to go into your brain. And so that is, that raises questions about safety of the device.
Nita, every time I speak to a college class and they ask me why I didn't do more about climate change or why I wasn't concerned about, Social Security, and I point out to them that I think there are things that they should be worried about now in their 20s that when they're 60 like me, and if they get to talk to a class, they will be asked that question. I usually say the robotic police dogs. That's what I tell them to be concerned about. But this is another one of those areas. We're not there yet, but who would be using this technology now, and what would our concerns be if we're paying attention right now to keep ourselves safe and use it ethically?
So I think that, just as Antonio points out, the technology that we're talking about for implanted electrodes used by people who are suffering from neurodegenerative disorders or who've lost their ability to communicate, the primary ethical issues really are around safety and around efficacy and ensuring that, the autonomy of the individuals on whom these are being researched, are able to provide full consent. There are complex questions with deep brain stimulation about continuity of self and, what that means for a person with depression. I focus more on kind of the next generation of these technologies, which is as we move from implanted electrodes and implanted technology, which is really focused on enabling people who have lost different abilities, to when it becomes more of an everyday device. So these are kind of moving from implanted neurotechnology to brain sensors that are integrated into our earbuds or into headphones that pick up everyday brain activity and are also being promoted for using to operate a video game or to meditate or even to track your attention or focus or start to learn more about your brain health. And there I worry about all of the classic things that we've worried about with the commodification of our data. But when it starts to be commodification of brain data by corporations or governments that can peer into our very mental experiences and, dare I say, even though it's a long way away, something that approximates thoughts and emotions, our innermost selves, our mental privacy, our freedom of thought is at risk.
Nita, I don't know about you, but during the last congressional hearings, when members of Congress were talking to the TikTok CEO, and I was a little bit more impressed than usual that they actually understood some things. They didn't make any Taylor Swift song references, which I was relieved at. But the lawmakers are still very far behind technology that we're using now that we're concerned about. And on a regular basis, we just give it up. We humans, we go, boy, this is so easy. I was so worried about it. I had a bad experience with my phone once that actually recorded, although they didn't say it recorded, they said it stored, and then tried to text a private conversation I had out to my boss, but it was just a bug. And then I just went, oh, well, I guess that's how it is. So if someone's learning about this for the first time, what should they be concerned about, and what action should they be taking for the next generation of this technology?
So today, what these everyday brain sensors can do are limited. They can pick up basic brain states like attention or focus or mind wandering. We should worry about, however, I think the kind of normalization of technology that really is a brand new category. So many people who've started to use these brain sensors, I think about them in much the same way they think about a heart rate sensor in their watch or a Fitbit that's picking up the number of steps that they take. But this is being trained on data that is very different in kind, right? What is happening in your brain and your mental processes is fundamentally different than the number of steps you've taken or what your heart rate is. It gets at much more core and fundamental information about what it means to be human. And whether we're talking about the detecting and decoding of that information or eventually the ability to make changes to it through electrical stimulation, we should worry a lot about interference by corporations, mandated use of it in the workplace, or the use by governments where it's already happening across the world, where police departments are using neurotechnology to interrogate criminal suspects' brains. And we should worry a lot about the validity of that information, right? How good can you actually pick up anything from the brain? What is it actually being decoded, and what kinds of choices are we making about people? But the choices people should be making today is how do we get ahead of when the technology is good enough to decode more and more information about the brain? How do we ensure that the terms of service are different so that we can say this is actually the most sensitive area of the body that you could be decoding, and to safeguard it so it's used to empower people and so that people have self-determination over that information? And I've been proposing this right to cognitive liberty. It's a cognitive liberty would give people rights in the digital age that ensure that our brains and mental experiences are treated differently and specially and aren't just as easily taken over by corporations and governments as all of the rest of our data has been.
So, Antonio, in the present, in the right now, it's being used for folks who need it medically. How do the businesses, how do the companies think they're going to make money on this, right? Because there's a limited number of people who need it right now. So what's the business model?
This basic experiment that we're talking about, put in some electrodes, have someone move a computer cursor. This is not a new experiment. This is 20 years old. But the difference is Elon Musk, right? I mean, he's got lots of money to bring to the problem and lots of ambition. I mean, he's got self-driving cars. He's got rockets that are landing, standing up. So let's not underestimate the importance of Musk's arrival on the scene. He brought together a team, well-funded team, to develop a better implant, an implant that could actually be a consumer product. And so I think that with Neuralink, one of the big questions is, they need to start with someone who is ill, right? A quadriplegic who actually could use this device to operate a computer. But Musk's original idea is to have like a whole brain interface and connect you, me, everybody to computers. And in fact, I was just on their website today, and it's clearly pitched like a consumer technology. It's saying, here's a device that you would use. Hey, it's going to connect to Bluetooth. Hey, look how nifty it is. So it is a strong pitch. They are pitching it as a consumer device, even though they have to start with real medical problems.
Antonio, how different is this? And this is a question for you too, Nita. How different is this from, Henry Ford and the inventors of the automobile just putting the car out there and saying, let's see how it goes. We talk a lot about safety, but the reality is that those of us who are concerned about safety and going slow, we don't invent things, right? I didn't invent a rocket. I didn't invent the internet. Is this just normal inventor behavior, and we just have to catch up?
I think there's the Elon Musk effect, right? I think Antonio is absolutely right, which is we can't ignore the fact that he's now part of it, that his MO and his stated intention is to bring this to the masses. But I think it has a different effect. I don't know if Neuralink will ever succeed in actually achieving what it has set out to achieve. But what it has done is really bring an extraordinary amount of attention to the field, right? So brain-computer interface companies, whether it's implanted neurotechnology companies or the huge number of players that have started to introduce everyday brain sensors, it's really stimulated all of the major tech companies, all of the brain-computer interface companies to rapidly start to think about consumer-facing technologies, which is why you have Meta investing in a watch that is supposed to serve as a neural interface to augmented reality. And you have Snap buying a major neurotech company called NextMind in order to integrate into its products. And you have Microsoft and Apple all looking at developing neural interface for everyone. I think it's the big untapped market in so many ways, right? People are used to quantifying every other aspect of their bodies and of their health, but we know virtually nothing about our own brains. So I think the Musk effect has led to a huge amount of funding and a race to be the first to develop a broad scale kind of killer app for everyone.
Would you agree with that?
I do. And like Nita, when I first heard this idea that he was proposing a sort of consumer brain implant, I said, no way, no way is any surgeon going to open someone's skull if they don't need it. There's always the risk of infection. Mm-hmm. But I have to say my view on that has started to change. One is I talked to some neurosurgeons, and they do this every day. So actually opening the top of someone's brain and putting in a little device, they don't think it's that big a deal. Number two is my iPhone is starting to tell me how many hours a day I use it. Mm-hmm. And it's like 6 hours a day. And that's on top of the other computer I'm using. So I realized that just in a short time frame, in the last 10 years, people have gone from using computers, 2 hours a day to every waking moment. Mm-hmm. And that creates a new argument why you might actually want one of these brain things.
Well, my chat GPT implant is telling
Antonio,
me...
do you think you would want one of them?
Would I like one of them?
No, I said, would Antonio
would you
want
like
one of them?
Is
somebody deep into it?
I don't know. Can I get a promo code for it? I don't know. Maybe.
Well, my chat GPT implant's telling me that it's time to wrap. So thank you so much for joining us, Antonio Regalado and Nita Farahany. Thanks so much. I appreciate your input on this.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Nita. Thank you, Antonio.
Thanks, Antonio. Thank you,
Thanks,
Sarah.
Nita.
Really
Bye.
enjoyed it.
That's it for tonight. Thanks for watching. I'm Sue O'Connell. Good night.